Parliamentarians debate an extension to the state of emergency. Police investigate the country's latest homicide, and the education minister comments on claims of a teacher's sexual misconduct. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leah Cooper with your JCN News for this Wednesday, January 27th. Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Dr. Hubert Minnis, laying the foundation, justifying why the state of emergency should be extended to May 23rd. In the midst of the ongoing global pandemic, COVID-19, Dr. Minnis telling parliamentarians this morning that the emergency orders in place are legal powers designed for moments like these, and that without these orders, there would have been many more deaths. He says with these orders, they have protected the Bahamian people, and what was done has been morally and constitutionally right, noting that every human being possesses the same dignity and should enjoy the same protections of their country, as the most fundamental right of every human being is the right to life.
These measures, Mr. Speaker, help us to stop the first wave at the beginning of the pandemic. These measures helped us to stop the second wave, which was even more severe. And we need these measures, Mr. Speaker, to continue to keep Bahamians safe. Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear with this point. The pandemic is not over.
COVID-19 has infected more than 98 million people worldwide and has claimed the lives of more than 2 million. Here in the Bahamas, the national COVID-19 count stands at more than 8,000 with 175 deaths. Dr. Minnis says that in this pandemic, the government does not make decisions for political gain and is not engaged in irresponsible magical thinking, suggesting that the opposition opposing the legal emergency measures used to save lives is their opposition to life-saving measures and opposing at every turn just to be popular. He says it is important to base analysis of the crisis in facts and reality, using data and advice from the medical experts to inform decision-making with.
Governments are elected, Mr. Speaker, to be defenders of the people's interests, not panderers to the whims of the day. The policies by government advanced these 10+ months have worked to beat back waves of the virus and save Bahamians. As a result, our country is currently one of the countries doing better from a health perspective. And the opposition, Mr. Speaker, would not even acknowledge this success. Their tactics is to politicize everything and to oppose for opposing's sake. As a government, we take advice from the best Bahamian experts led by Dr. Dal Regis and the medical team at the Ministry of Health. We have a good team all Bahamians should be proud of.
The Prime Minister says with record cases, hospitalizations and deaths in so many countries, global travel is again being curtailed to slow the importation of the virus around the world. There are new travel restrictions coming into force or the outright closure of borders, whereas existing versions of the virus are already quite infectious. Mutations are making matters even worse. The Prime Minister says that if at times, some of these rules were unpopular. As a doctor and Prime Minister, he was prepared to deliver the bitter medicine to keep Bahamians well.
Such a review, Mr. Speaker, will incorporate the required COVID-19 health protocols and advise the relevant health authorities. Specific consideration will be given to the nature of the work environment and physical workspaces, the specific concerns of employees related to any personal extenuating health issues, and in consultation with the respective trade unions. The return of employees to their places of work will commence as early as 1st of February 2021.
Meantime, since March 2020, some government agency employees worked from home because of the pandemic and the need for social distancing, while others reported to work as per its permanent secretaries in respective ministries. Many public officers continue to function from the office in reduced numbers and on shift systems. Dr. Minnis announced today that those agencies will now review the situation and current arrangements for the conduct of work by public officers and for their orderly and safe return to the workplace. Dr. Minnis emphasized that the safety and well-being of all employees in public service, their families, and all citizens and residents remain his and the government's highest priority. As for those who are still employed, the Prime Minister also announced that NIB's unemployment benefit will be extended again to the end of February to provide necessary financial support to families still suffering from the economic dislocation caused by the pandemic. Dr. Minnis commended the Bahamian people for their discipline, as he says we must remain disciplined to keep the numbers low, be realistic, and with new strains circulating, it's quite possible for the country to have additional waves before our population is vaccinated. Health Minister and Member of Parliament for Bamboo Town defends the Prime Minister's resolution to extend the state of emergency. During his contribution to debate this morning, Mr. Wells says that the Bahamian people, healthcare workers, the government, and frontline workers have done a fantastic job in curbing the spread of the virus during the second wave, adding that the Bahamas entered its second wave earlier than most countries. He says we must now, more than ever, adhere to measures put in place to save lives and regain our economic prospect and livelihoods.
Mr. Speaker, we, in spite of the strides we have made in the war against this invisible enemy, SARS-CoV-2 virus, again, I say we cannot rest on our laurels. We must keep up our balance. Other countries around the world remain in their second wave, and some are now experiencing a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The United Kingdom is in full lockdown. Scotland until February at the earliest. England until the 31st of March. Wales is up for review at the end of January. And Northern Ireland is extended until the 5th of March. Lockdowns, Mr. Speaker, are occurring in the United Kingdom even in the midst of vaccine deployment. Mr. Speaker, Germany is in a lockdown until mid-February, with deaths having increased to an average of 1,000 deaths a day for weeks. All of this happening while Germany is deploying the Pfizer vaccine. Mr. Speaker, with nightly curfew currently in place in metropolitan France, there are reports of calls in France now for a third lockdown to contain the virus as hospitalization increased sharply there.
He also addressed questions surrounding new COVID-19 variants popping up across the globe.
The National Reference Lab has and is instituting genomic surveillance of variants of concerns, VOC. A protocol and database for the national genomic surveillance of circulating SARS-CoV-2 strains has been drafted and is being operationalized now. We have identified 2 reference laboratories to perform the genomic sequencing, that is CARPA and the PAHO Reference Lab in Rio de Janeiro. Mr. Speaker, we're also looking to send samples to the CDC as well for sequencing. Mr. Speaker, an initial 40 representative samples from throughout the Bahamian archipelago and spanning the first and second wave are en route as we speak to the Brazil Reference Lab for our first round of genomic surveillance. And results will be reported to the ministry and then on to the Bahamian people.
The health minister reiterated that this pandemic is not over, adding that although the country has done a good job in curbing the spread, we must not let our guards down just yet. Meantime, opposition leader Philip Davis spoke against yet another extension to the state of emergency during his contribution to debate this morning. Mr. Davis says some 10 months have passed since the Prime Minister appointed himself as the sole competent authority, and for 10 months he has ruled without consultation, without transparency, and without accountability.
10 months later, the threat of COVID has not disappeared, nor are we COVID-free. As to more than 1,100 Bahamians with active cases of COVID tell us. But any new measures needed to keep Bahamians safe can be enacted, as I indicated before, through ordinary legislation. This government's own Attorney General, I reiterate, has confirmed it. Instead, the Prime Minister has decided once again extend for himself the power to spend public funds. This is what he's doing it with the extension of the state of emergency. And he's entrenching the power to spend the public funds outside of the ordinary procurement process. He has extended power to himself to punish and reward. The power to pick favorites, right, like mahogany, and the power to make decisions without having to debate or defend them.
Mr. Davis then asks why the Prime Minister is so determined to operate parliamentary oversight, accusing Dr. Minnis of avoiding accountability.
Mr. Speaker, the emergency regulations might give the competent authority great power. But with great power, Mr. Prime Minister, there are also some responsibilities. Within 6 weeks of the expiration, Mr. Speaker, within 6 weeks of the expiration of a proclamation of emergency, the Prime Minister is required, and the Minister of Finance is required to bring a report before Parliament detailing expenditures, supplies for the goods and services procured, and the reasons those supplies were chosen. Just look at Section 11, subsection 2 of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Regulation. That we laid here, that you're extending out to. Twice the proclamation of emergency has expired. At the end of June and in November. And neither time did you comply with that requirement.
He adds that the Minnis-led administration has at its disposal thousands of employees and millions of dollars, but no plan in sight, urging the government to act now instead of waiting for a crisis to develop only to react.
At a minimum, the government needs to expand testing capabilities to be in a position to tamp down any new outbreaks. Testing must be made accessible and free. For Bahamians concerned, they may have been exposed to the virus. The government must prepare now to isolate any new cases, so that Bahamians across the country can be treated in our clinics and hospitals for other illnesses without concerns about being infected there. Cloth masks may not offer sufficient protection from the new coronavirus variants. In addition to ensuring sufficient PPE for healthcare workers, the government, I recommend, to stockpile medical grade mask offering of 94 to 95% filtration, and provide them to all frontline workers, from immigration to police to defense force workers, as well as others.
Mr. Davis urged the government to move now as the country is in pain. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.